Let's see where I'm at on the go-ahead sheet. Right now, 17 minutes after 6 o'clock.
Hootie Brown, known as Cousin Al on WGBA and WDAK, spoke the language of his listeners, the mill and shift workers in Columbus. Cuz read Snuffy Smith out of the morning paper.
Well, now, let's see what they're doing up in Hoot and Holler here. That's on page D13.
And he made his listeners hungry, talking about cackleberries and cathead biscuits, as he joked about his fictional wife, Annabelle, and their host of crumb snatchers. Brown separated his country fried on-air alter ego from his business persona. He owned the Background Music Company and a record store in Columbus.
Solid Gold, 1968 sound, music by the Beatles, and it's called Lady Madonna with Buddy Carr. 2:39 the afternoon, 21 minutes away from Holly Drew at 3 o'clock.
Buddy Carr, real name John Odom, got into broadcasting at WJAT in Swainsboro, Georgia. When popular top 40 station WBBQ in Augusta posted an opening, Buddy decided to take a shot at it. Program director Harley Drew offered him the job, and Buddy's career in Augusta radio began on the evening shift in the fall of 1969.
2:45 with Buddy Carr, 55 degrees on the north side, presenting sounds of Red Eye and games.
Buddy's quick wit, wry sense of humor, and slight rebelliousness quickly made him a huge favorite of Augusta listeners, and Buddy was eventually given the opportunity to see if his type of air work would appeal to a morning audience. Buddy went on to become the highest-rated personality in Augusta, with #1 shares in every demographic. When Jimmy Davenport's dad took over management of WTJH in College Park, he put Jimmy in charge of the Georgia Jubilee, a live Opry-style program. Jim was eventually lured away by Jim Wilder to work at WBIE in Marietta. And in 1961, Al Jones, owner of WFOM in Marietta, hired Jim as manager. Jimmy was a great student of Top 40 radio, taking pointers from his old friend Bill Drake, and he built WFOM into a nationally recognized Top 40 station serving Cobb County. Jimmy's Monday night music meetings were legendary, and WFOM broke many hits. Jimmy gave a lot of aspiring young disc jockeys their big break at WFOM, and familiar names like Big Hugh Baby, Red Jones, John Long, and Paul Sebastian, and Herb Emery worked for Jim. Jimmy bought the station in 1969 and operated it for a decade. Known as the Old Bear, Jim Davenport received numerous industry excellence awards. After radio, Jim went on to become the preeminent music promotion consultant in the Southeast.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
Douglas Edwards came to WSB from WAGF in Dothan, Alabama. In his early days, he honed his craft at WSB Radio. He worked both as a member of the WSB Radio news staff and was assistant news editor for the Atlanta Journal. He left Atlanta in 1938 to work at WXYZ Detroit, but returned to WSB in 1940 as assistant news director. In 1942, he went on to New York, where he became an icon of broadcasting, working for many years at CBS News.
Hammer in, Hank, won't you hit one more? Make a score and then one more. The golden number is 714, 714, 714. Boost the Braves, sound the call, yell for Hank, one and all.
Elmo Ellis began his radio career as Director of Public Relations for WSB Radio in 1940. When World War II broke out, Elmo joined the Army Air Corps, where he worked as a writer and producer of radio programs that aired on the major networks. After the war, he continued working with network radio as a writer and producer of the famous We the People show, as well as other network radio programs. Ellis left radio for television in 1948 as production manager for WSB TV. He would stay in that role until 1952, when he was persuaded to try to revive WSB Radio, an era that became famous for Ellis's call to remove the rust from radio. Elmo Ellis was the programming and production manager for WSB Radio from 1952 until 1964, when he was promoted to the position he is best remembered for as general manager of WSB AM and FM. Eventually, Ellis ascended to the position of vice president of the Cox Broadcasting Corporation. He retired from radio in 1982, but not before indelibly etching his name and his voice in the minds and hearts of many in Atlanta.
Apparently, it was on this date in history that Mrs. Tom Edison, rolled over and said to her husband, "I don't know what you're doing, Tom, but I sure as hell can't sleep with that light on."
Skinny Bobby Harper came to WPLO in Atlanta in 1965. When the station changed to country, he was fired. In 1967, he left WKNR in Detroit to return to Atlanta and WQXI, where he proved to be a little too controversial. He was fired. Bobby loved Atlanta and returned again in 1970 to work at WIIN until 1973. Then, after a 2-year absence from Atlanta, he came back again, this time to stay, in 1975, and went on to work at WGST, WKLS, WLTA, WCNN, and WSB. Legend has it that the Dr. Johnny Fever character on WKRP in Cincinnati was based on Skinny Bobby Harper.
He's on!
Just call me Angel of the Morning. Good morning. This is the Little Devil of the Morning, the Patrick Aloysius Hughes Show at 8:10. WQXI, good morning to you time.
Like so many other WQXI staff members, such as Kent Burkhart, Red Jones, Rod Roddy, and Ken Dow during Quixie's prime ratings years, Pat Hughes came from Texas, arriving in Atlanta in 1961 from K-Box in Dallas.
WQXI. It's past 8 o'clock. Good morning. How are you?
He gained and maintained high audience ratings. He was involved in numerous outside activities, such as weekend record hops at Misty Waters and early promotion of Ronnie Millsap, who, as we all know, would go on to become a legend in country music. Pat was instrumental in obtaining a Scepter recording contract for Ronnie in 1965. Pat Hughes worked as a booth announcer at WAGA television until his death.
Just walk on by, wait on the corner.
While still a teenager, Bill Lowry worked in radio markets around the Southeast, including Shreveport, Louisiana, Macomb, Mississippi, Hot Springs, Arkansas, and Elizabethton, Tennessee, before coming to Atlanta. At just 21 years old, he became the youngest station manager in American radio at WQXI. He later went on to work at WGST. But his biggest contribution to radio would be the byproduct of his involvement in independent record production and promotion and the Lowry Music Company. With rock and roll still in its infancy in 1956, Gene Vincent's Be-Bop-A-Lula became the Lowry Music Company's first million seller. The following year, another Lowry published tune, Young Love, reached #1 for both Tab Hunter and Sonny James.
They say for every boy and girl, there's just one love in this whole world, and I know I found mine.
Over the years, Bill Lowry has had his hands in the production and promotion of so many hit songs and recording artists heard on radio stations everywhere. There were times when it seemed like you couldn't go more than a quarter hour or so without hearing at least one of his hit records.
Well, the games people play.
The Lowry music catalog has grown to more than 5,000 titles and encompasses nearly every genre of music, including all the songs you've been listening to as I've been telling you about Bill Lowry, a great friend to radio, and his hits just kept on coming.
Daddy works the night shift. He works hard all night long.
First heard on WAOK as the Mystery Lady in 1954, Zilla Mays revealed her identity in 1955 and began hosting The Dream Girl Show, which aired on the station every night. She also made frequent appearances on Piano Red's WAOK show. Like Piano Red, Zilla Mays had signed to RCA Victor's Groove subsidiary through her association with Zenas Sears and released several records on the label. Zilla helped organize the WAOK road shows, bringing live R&B and gospel music to the Southeast. She recorded singles for Brunswick, Coral, Mercury, and Checker before releasing her album The Men I Love and the Songs They Sang on Bill Lowry's NRC label.
Welcome to Great Moments in Soul. Hi, I'm Bob McKee. They called her Big Mama Thornton. From 1952, here is Big Mama's song, Hound Dog.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog.
Bob McKee's radio career began and almost ended in Jackson, Mississippi. McKee took the station manager's suggestion to spice things up a bit by broadcasting imaginary news reports about the moon falling from the sky. The town was in a near panic, and Bob left Jackson the next day. While working at KMUS in Muskogee, Oklahoma, he was invited to be a guest DJ with Robert Q. Lewis on the CBS radio program The ABCs of Music. Then Bob came to Atlanta in 1951, where he joined WQXI and later moved to WAKE. While at Wake, he owned a teen club on Ivy Street near Marist High School named McKee's Beat. In 1967, McKee moved to WAOK, where he remained for 17 years. In 1978, he was co-producer of a syndicated radio program.
Great Moments in Soul.
Don't miss the Otis Redding Show, headlining America's #1 male R&B vocalist, Otis Redding.
Edwin A. Mendel, Dr. Jive, was the first R&B and gospel disc jockey in Columbus. In 1941, Ed shipped off for World War II, but would return just 2 years later to begin his broadcasting career in Columbus, quickly making the move to Atlanta's WAGA-AM, where he originally worked for free and eventually got his own time slot. In 1946, Mendel moved back to Columbus, where he made a name for himself at WGBA-AM as Dr. Jive, playing jazz and rhythm and blues records on his daily show In the Groove, which would eventually be renamed Dr. Jive after his on-air persona. Following his stint at WGBA, Mendel moved back over to WDAK, where he continued his Dr. Jive show. Mendel then moved over to WOKS, which featured programming specifically catering to Columbus's African-American community. Every day, Dr. Jive started his show with his signature phrase, "The clock on the wall says it's 4:05. Jump back and let's have some more jive." Back in the Navy, Hank Morgan used to crack up his fellow servicemen with his off-the-cuff disc jockeying. The other airmen nicknamed him Crazy House. Later, following a brief stop at a radio station in North Carolina, Hank the Prank came to Atlanta to work at WQXI and later WATL. He was best known as the radio voice of the Atlanta Crackers baseball team from 1954 through 1964 in the Southern Association and International League. He then joined Mel Allen and Ernie Johnson on WSB as the radio and television broadcast team for the Braves in 1965. He was one of the first sports announcers to deliver play-by-play of Georgia Tech SEC basketball. After a brief retirement in Florida, he returned to Atlanta in 1985 and worked at WCNN Radio.
Now, when I was a little boy, my mama said to me, "There's lots of songs for you to sing, places for you to see."
In the early to mid-50s, William Perryman, known to many as Piano Red, struck up a lifelong friendship and professional relationship with Zenas Sears, who had a show on WGST called The Blues Caravan. Sears had moved to WATL and had taken over the management and eventually the ownership of the station, changing the call letters to WAOK and introducing an all R&B format. Sears maintained a close relationship with many of Atlanta's R&B artists and recorded Perryman, Piano Red, at WAOK. Red also hosted a radio show from 3 to 4 each day, which was broadcast from a small structure in his backyard that was outfitted with a piano and microphones and connected directly to the studios at WAOK.
I'll be there when you call. It's my town, underground.
Born in Macon, Helen Farmer Popejoy received her early education in Bibb County schools and graduated from Wesleyan College and from Wesleyan Conservatory in 1945. From 1945 to 1953, Mrs. Popejoy was in radio at WMAZ.
I had won an award in overall radio excellence, and with it came the job. So I started with MAZ the very next day. They put me in the brand new news department. You see, we had never had a local woman on the news regularly.
She also worked at WBML in Macon and WRBL in Columbus. After a successful radio career, Mrs. Popejoy went on to enjoy similar success in Macon television. Later, she remained engaged in community, charitable, and church activities, as well as teaching at Stratford Academy and Wesleyan College.
Tavares on FM 92 at 8:24 in the morning. Stan Richards with you. Good morning. We saw, you and I got ripped off. We didn't have any springtime this year. All we had was winter. Went right straight into summer.
While living in Baton Rouge, Stan Richards became interested in radio through a roommate, George Carlin. And soon after his Air Force commitment ended, Stan pursued his radio career. He got a job on the midnight shift at KRMD in Shreveport. Then he learned of a top 40 station in the Atlanta area that was burning up the airwaves with only 250 watts. Wanting to be closer to his family, he moved to Wake in Atlanta, where he became popular as Stan the Man. When Bill Drake left for California, he wanted Stan to go with him, but Richards chose to stay in the Atlanta area. Stan left radio in 1966 to pursue a television career with WXIA and continue as an Air National Guard pilot. One mission he flew in collaboration with WXIA about the Vietnam War and the Air National Guard, won the Peabody Award. After health problems, Stan returned to radio briefly, working at WATL and WBTR.
Come on down. You're the next contestant on The Price is Right.
Known to the world as the announcer on TV's longest-running game show, The Price is Right, Rod Roddy's path to broadcasting immortality led through Atlanta. A native of Fort Worth, Roddy joined the staff of WQXI in the early 1960s. Anyone who grew up listening to Quixie at that time remembers hearing the Rod Roddy radio program. He went on to host both music and talk shows from Miami to Dallas to Los Angeles. But it was in Los Angeles that he would gain national fame as the announcer for numerous game shows, including Family Feud, Love Connection, Press Your Luck, Hitman, and the television series Soap. He also appeared in episodes of That 70s Show. Rod Roddy, come on down. You're the next Legacy inductee in the Georgia Radio Hall of Fame.
Here he is, Mr. Personality, Dr. Don Rose.
There is a moose nuzzling up against a sign in Yellowstone Park. The sign says, "Do not feed the bears." He's got a hand-lettered sign around his neck that says, "I am not a bear."
After 4 years at the University of Nebraska, where he majored in accounting, Donald Rosenberg worked at Coil in Omaha, KTSA in San Antonio, and KRNY in Kearney, Nebraska, and with the same dismal result in each city. He was fired. It took several humiliating months to get another job, but Rose ended up at KWMT, Fort Dodge, Iowa, where his luck changed. And after 5 frigid years, he was off to Atlanta's WQXI, where he replaced Sam Hale, noon to 3. Eventually, Dr. Don Rose was moved to mornings and was then hired away to legendary WFIL in Philadelphia. In 1973, he landed the morning show at KFRC in San Francisco, and what a run it was. During Dr. Don's 20 years in San Francisco, his March of Dimes Superwalks raised more than $10 million.
is Guy Sharp with TV5 News Scene. Heavy thunderstorms are moving slowly over Atlanta at this time. Flooding near creeks and in low-lying areas is now taking place. These storm cells should diminish within the next 2 or 3 hours. Stay tuned to TV5 for further weather updates.
Before Leland Guy Sharp, Jr. became a TV weatherman on Channel 5, WAGA, he always thought his career would have him looking up, but not at clouds. After studying at Young Harris and LaGrange colleges for a career in the ministry, Guy became associate pastor at the Rock Methodist Church in Thomaston, Georgia. But he gave up his part-time jobs as a minister and clothing salesman to get into radio at WSFT in Thomaston. Guy Sharp went on to work at WQXI in Atlanta before moving over to television, where he became known as Guy on Your Side. After leaving television, he returned to radio, hosting a morning talk show and an oldies program on WGFS in Covington. Robert C. Van Camp had worked for radio stations in Scranton, Pennsylvania and Raleigh, North Carolina before becoming an officer in the Army Air Corps during World War II. While serving at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, Bob met Elmo Ellis, who recommended that he be hired as an announcer at WSB after the war. An accomplished pianist and organist, Bob used his musical gifts on his WSB morning show, where he played live musical introductions leading into commercials. He played tunes on the organ for WSB Radio's It Pays to Listen quiz show that paid contestants $1 for identifying a song. Bob Van Camp was the staff organist at the Fox Theater, where he played 2 or 3 times a day on weekends for motion picture presentations, sing-alongs, and small concerts. He was master of ceremonies for the Atlanta Pops Orchestra conducted by Albert Coleman, and was the narrator for the Christmas tree lighting ceremony at Rich's Department Store for many years.
We have exactly 1 minute now until 12:15. Which means that these words right here are the last ones that will be spoken on WSB Radio from the Biltmore Hotel.
Jerry Van Deventer began his radio career at a small station in College Park, and then in 1949, he became the music librarian at WSB. One day, Elmo Ellis heard what he thought were several people chatting and laughing in the WSB music library. Upon further investigation, he discovered it was just Jerry, and urged him to become a staff announcer. Jerry recreated the WSB Barn Dance Show, doing the voices of all the cast, and became known as the Man of Many Voices. Ellis selected Jerry to host Night Beat on WSB, a show that reflected after-dark life in Atlanta and the world. Jerry counted Bob Hope, Jerry Lewis, Dinah Shore, Frank Sinatra, and many others among his friends and admirers. Jerry hosted the last WSB broadcast of Night Beat from the Biltmore Hotel on December 28, 1955.
Rather unusual type of honor for old JV to have, and I feel inspired and nostalgic at the same time. It's been a great 6 years for me, and I'm sure a great 30 years for the station.
Gone to University Hospital's emergency room in a AAA ambulance from an accident involving a rather large truck. We're on the way to University, and we'll have complete details on the accident shortly. This is Car 9 of the WBBQ 24-hour news fleet.
WBBQ on the scene news. WBBQ.
Shortly after serving in World War II, George Weiss formed Savannah Valley Broadcasting with several prominent Augusta citizens, and soon realized his long-held dream of starting a radio station. Having spent much of his youth in Chicago, Weiss selected the call letters WBBQ for his Augusta station by combining the call letters of 2 Chicago stations, WBBM and WMAQ. He eventually bought out all the other partners and became sole owner of the station, and added WBBQ FM in 1956. Weiss was content to let his managers run the day-to-day business, while he supervised the mobile news department, and he covered breaking news from the city's most famous news vehicle, WBBQ Car 1. Weiss realized the future of radio was in contemporary popular music, and he ordered the station to adopt a top 40 format in late 1960. WBBQ went on to become the dominant radio station in Augusta and one of the highest rated stations in America. George Weiss donated the stations to the Medical College of Georgia, where he received cancer treatments before his death. Born in 1895 in Lumpkin County, Georgia, Hoyt Wimpy served in the U.S. Army in World War I, when he developed an interest in all things electrical, including radio. Following the war, Wimpy relocated to Thomasville and in December 1922 put WPAX on the air with 10 watts of power feeding a birdcage antenna from his garage on Stevens Street. It was Georgia's third radio station. Wimpy also constructed and sold receivers, which were reputed to be of excellent quality. He was an early experimenter with shortwave radio and a licensed amateur radio operator. In 1934, he oversaw construction of the present WPAX tower on Remington Avenue. He retained ownership of WPAX until the early 1960s. Truly one of Georgia's radio pioneers, Hoyt Wimpy remained very much a radio enthusiast until his death in 1982.